What up, doe? Welcome to the D. From the concrete of Gratiot to the hustle of 7 Mile. From the parties at Hart Plaza to the late nights on Jefferson. This is Detroit Tales and Stories, where the Motor City's realest stories come alive. We're taking you back to when the streets had their own rules, when your whip spoke louder than words, and when survival meant everything. The mid-'80s to the 2000s, when Detroit was raw, uncut, and unforgettable. These are the stories they don't tell you about, straight from the heart of the D. Detroit Tales and Stories. Real stories, real Detroit, real talk.
Part 2, The Reckoning. Opening, the test. The meeting took place at the same abandoned house where this all started. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the weight of unspoken threats. Tanisha sat at the head of a folding table, her .38 Special gleaming under the harsh fluorescent light like a promise of violence. Around the room, her soldiers watched with the hungry anticipation of people who'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. Tommy entered with Sarah, his fresh Jordan silent on the concrete floor, his face already pale with dread. The Timex on his wrist beeped, 6 p.m. Time for judgment. "You know why we're here," Tanisha said, her gold Versace frames reflecting the harsh light. "The crew from the east side disrespected our territory. Hit one of our spots last night, sent 3 of our people to Henry Ford Hospital." She pushed the gun across the table toward Tommy, the metal scraping against wood like fingernails on a chalkboard. "Time to handle business, baby. Show me you're more than just pretty words and sweet dreams." Chapter 8, The Choice. Tommy stared at the weapon like it was a living thing, something that might bite him if he got too close. Around the room, the smell of Newport cigarettes and cheap cologne mixed with the mustiness of decay, the perfume of Detroit's underground economy. "Tanisha, I can't..." "You can't what?" she interrupted, her voice dangerously quiet. "You can't protect what's mine. You can't defend the woman who's been taking care of you." Sarah watched the exchange with growing dread, recognizing the trap Tanisha had laid. This wasn't about business. It was about control, about breaking Tommy's spirit so completely that he'd never again question who owned his soul. "I won't be your killer," Tommy said finally, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "I won't let you turn me into something I'm not." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Tanisha began to laugh, but there was no humor in the sound, just the bitter recognition of a queen who'd pushed too far. "Sarah," she said, never taking her eyes off Tommy, "you see this? This is what your influence has done. You've made him weak, useless." "He's not weak." Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been Tanisha's partner long before Tommy appeared. "He's showing strength by refusing to compromise who he is." "Strength?" Tanisha's voice rose. "This is strength? Refusing to protect his family?" "I'm not his family," Sarah said quietly, her gold nameplate necklace catching the light. "You are, but you treat him like property instead of a person." Chapter 9, The Breaking Point. "Get out," Tanisha said, her voice barely controlled fury. "Both of you, get out before I do something we'll all regret." As they walked toward the door, Tommy's hand found Sarah's, their fingers intertwining like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Tanisha watched this simple gesture of affection and felt something crack inside her chest, not her heart, which had been carefully armored years ago, but something deeper. Her sense of self, maybe, or her understanding of what power actually meant. "This isn't over," she called after them, but her voice carried less conviction than usual. Not by a long shot. Chapter 10, False Peace. In the weeks that followed, an uneasy truce settled over their triangle. Tanisha pulled back from direct confrontation, seemingly focused on expanding territory and solidifying connections with their Mexican suppliers. Sarah and Tommy grew closer, their relationship deepening from attraction to genuine love, the kind that made both of them better versions of themselves. Tommy threw himself into his music with new intensity. His performances at the Packard plant became legendary in Detroit's underground scene, his lyrics painting vivid pictures of love surviving in a world designed to kill it. Songs like Gentle Warrior and Heart vs. Streets resonated with audiences who understood the price of staying human in an inhuman game. "You're incredible up there," Sarah told him one night after a particularly powerful set. They'd stolen away to a quiet spot overlooking the Detroit River, the Renaissance Center's lights reflecting off the water like a promise of renewal. "I feel like myself when I'm performing," Tommy replied, "like the person I was meant to be before all this started." "You already are that person," Sarah said, adjusting her nameplate necklace. "Tanisha can't change that unless you let her." When he kissed her, it wasn't desperate or forbidden. It was a promise of something real and lasting. Chapter 11. The Trap. The olive branch came through intermediaries, as these things always did. Tanisha wanted a meeting to discuss terms. She was ready to negotiate a peaceful separation. Tommy could have his freedom. Sarah could maintain her position. Everyone could move forward without unnecessary bloodshed. "I don't trust her," Sarah told Tommy as they sat in her apartment. The sounds of late-night Detroit filtering through the windows, distant sirens, the bass from someone's car stereo, the urban symphony they'd both grown up with. This isn't how Tanisha operates. But Tommy was exhausted by the constant tension, the looking over shoulders, the fear that colored every moment of their stolen happiness. "Maybe she's finally ready to let go," he said hopefully. "Maybe she realizes that forcing someone to stay isn't the same as earning their loyalty." Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed to the meeting. They would meet at Club Polo, neutral ground where Tanisha couldn't easily orchestrate violence without consequences. Chapter 12. The Performance. When they arrived at Club Polo, the club was jumping to the sounds of Janet Jackson's "That's the Way Love Goes," the bass line vibrating through the floor like a heartbeat. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, expensive cologne, and the kind of sexual energy that made Detroit nightlife legendary. Tanisha was already waiting in the back booth, looking smaller somehow, less intimidating in the dim lighting. She wore a simple black dress instead of her usual designer gear, her gold jewelry understated, almost vulnerable. "Thank you for coming," she said, standing when she saw them. "I know this is difficult for all of us." "What do you want, Tanisha?" Sarah asked, but without her usual edge. "I want to make this right," Tanisha replied, pulling out an envelope thick with cash. "This is for both of you. Enough to start over somewhere new, somewhere I can't reach." Tommy looked stunned. "You're really letting us go?" "I'm letting you choose," Tanisha said, and there seemed to be genuine emotion in her voice. "Choose each other. Choose happiness. Choose whatever future you want to build together." Chapter 13. The Final Betrayal. Sarah felt tears pricking her eyes. Despite everything, the betrayal, the manipulation, the cruelty, Tanisha had been her closest friend, her sister in everything but blood. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching across the table to touch Tanisha's hand. "This means everything to me." "Just promise me something," Tanisha said, her fingers intertwining with Sarah's. "Promise me you'll be happy. Promise me you'll build something beautiful together." "I promise," Sarah said, meaning it completely. "There's just one thing I need," Tanisha said, her voice still warm and supportive. "Those supplier contacts. I'll need those numbers to keep the business running." Sarah nodded without hesitation, reaching into her purse for the small address book where she kept the encrypted contact information. It was a gesture of trust, a final gift to the woman who had been her closest friend. As Sarah bent over the table to write down the contact information, her guard completely down, Tanisha's hand moved with practiced precision. The small .22 caliber pistol appeared in her grip as naturally as breathing. "Sarah," she said softly. When Sarah looked up, smiling with genuine affection and gratitude, Tanisha was already squeezing the trigger. The sound was muffled by the club's music, barely audible above Mary J. Blige's voice crooning about real love. Sarah's smile remained frozen on her face for a heartbeat before confusion clouded her eyes. She looked down at the spreading crimson stain on her white blouse, then back at Tanisha with complete bewilderment. "Why?" she whispered, her hand reaching across the table. "Because you forgot the most important rule," Tanisha replied, her voice now cold as a Detroit winter. "In this game, there's only room for one queen." Chapter 14. Devastation. Tommy's scream tore from his soul like something living being ripped away. He lunged forward, catching Sarah as she slumped toward the table, her weight settling against him with terrible finality. "Sarah, baby, stay with me," he pleaded, his hands frantically trying to stem the bleeding while his voice broke with desperation. "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me." But her eyes were already growing distant, that bright intelligence that had first attracted him fading like candlelight in the wind. She tried to speak, her lips moving soundlessly. "Love you," she managed, her voice barely a whisper carried on her last breath. Tommy felt something fundamental shatter inside him, not just his heart, but his entire sense of reality, his understanding of how the world worked. The gentle soul who had refused to take a gun was dying along with the woman in his arms. "No, no, no," he sobbed, rocking her lifeless body as tears streamed unchecked. "We were supposed to get out together. We were supposed to build something beautiful." Chapter 15. Recognition. Tanisha watched Tommy's complete dissolution with something approaching shock. She had expected anger she could manipulate, fear she could control, even acceptance of the street's harsh rules. She had not expected this. Grief so raw and complete it revealed the fundamental emptiness of her own existence. In all her years building her empire, surrounded by men who spoke of loyalty but would sell each other for the right price, she had never witnessed devotion like this. The love between Tommy and Sarah wasn't the possessive, controlling emotion she had mistaken it for. It was something pure and transformative, and she had destroyed it. "You don't understand," Tommy said, looking up at her with eyes that held infinite pain. "She wasn't just my lover, Tanisha. She was my conscience, my hope, my reason for believing there was still good in this world. Without her, I'm not just alone. I'm lost." Epilogue. The real cost. Tommy disappeared after that night, vanishing into Detroit's urban landscape like smoke. When Tanisha's people found him weeks later at the ruins of the Packard plant, he was a ghost of the dreamer who had walked into her world. "Why didn't you run?" she asked. "Where would I run to?" he replied, his voice empty. "Everything that gave my life meaning is gone." Years later, when federal investigations brought down Tanisha's empire and left her alone in a prison cell, she would think about that night at Club Polo. Not about the tactical victory, but about the moment she had seen true love die and realized she had never experienced anything like it herself. Tommy's music lived on in Detroit's underground, passed from artist to artist like urban legend. His story became a cautionary tale whispered in recording studios and freestyle ciphers, a reminder that in a world built on violence and betrayal, love was the rarest and most dangerous commodity of all. And sometimes, late at night when the prison was quiet, Tanisha would whisper Sarah's name and wonder if there had been another way. A path that didn't lead to this empty victory, this hollow crown, this prison of her own making. She had chosen power over love, control over trust, fear over faith, She had won a game that nobody else was playing. The problem was, winning meant she lost everything that mattered.
That's another chapter from the Tales and Stories, fam. If these stories take you back to the D you remember, or help you understand the D you never knew, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Drop a comment and tell us your Detroit story. What block you claimed, what party store you remember, what ride you were pushing. Follow us on the gram at Detroit Tales and Stories for behind the scenes content and rare photos from the era. Until next time, keep the D alive in your heart. Peace.